25 years ago, Anastasia was released in theaters and was a box office success. While it received conflicting reactions from critics at the time, the movie still has retained positive attention from the public throughout the years. I remember watching this movie as a kid, but what made me remember it more was finding out as I got older that the movie was loosely based on real people and events. But the real story was much darker and sadder than what was depicted on the big screen. Even Don Bluth admitted that he was turned off at first to take on this movie since the real story ended with Anastasia and her family being brutally murdered. I have earned a degree in history in recent years, and have been pondering a question recently on the subject. When is it fine and not fine to be historically inaccurate? I wish that more movies that are based on a true story were more historically accurate, just like how many people wish that adaptations of novels, comic books, or video games didn't diverge so much from the source material. I do think that the movie Mank said it best.
You cannot capture a man's entire life in 2 hours. All you can hope is to leave the impression of one.
Which is ironic since that movie takes many creative liberties with depicting historical characters and events. Even though many people who study history know that the Europeans did not land in the Americas during the time of the Maya as shown in Apocalypto, or that Marie Antoinette never said,
"Let them eat cake."
The average person watching these movies will think that is true since many people believe that what is depicted in a movie by a historical event is true. I cannot blame them since most people watch movies for escapism and do not have the luxury of researching every movie that they watch. But anyone with a few brain cells rubbed together will know that woolly mammoths were not used to build the pyramids, Abraham Lincoln did not kill vampires, or that Pocahontas did not sing about the colors of the wind to John Smith. One of my favorite biopic movies is Ed Wood. Even though it does have its fair share of historical inaccuracies, mainly portraying Bela Lugosi as having a potty mouth, which was not the case.
Fuck you! Karloff does not deserve to smell my shit! That limey cocksucker can rot in hell for all I care!
I do enjoy it for being an underdog story that goes wrong in all the right ways. Ironically, the director of this movie went to direct Mars Attacks, a movie that felt like what if Ed Wood had a big budget to make the movie that he wanted to make. Sometimes it's about showing a different perspective that audiences are not familiar with. Clint Eastwood made both Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima back to back and released them in 2006. This was to experiment to show two separate movies on the Battle of Iwo Jima, but from opposing perspectives on the conflict to explore. So enough beating around the bush. When is it fine and not fine to be historically inaccurate? I think that if a movie is so fantastical in its production and storytelling that it's basically telling audiences in a not so subtle way that the story was meant to be more fiction than fact. I look at a movie like Anastasia in the same way I look at 300 or Dracula Untold, where those are fancy depictions of real people and events. Sometimes it can work if it's being told through the perspective of an individual. In 300, the story is narrated by a man who personally knew King Leonidas, but his patriotism and respect for his king and country does over-exaggerate the events of the battle itself. Even the fact that this man wears an eye patch visually shows how his perspective is skewed. The same can be said for Braveheart, where that movie is based on the Wallace, a poem made by the Scots as a romanticized take on William Wallace. A better example is Amadeus, where it does get things about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's life wrong. It is told through the lens of someone who knew him, and how his bias saw things differently.
That was not Mozart laughing, Father. That was God. That was God laughing at me through that obscene giggle.
A recent example of playing with perspectives was The Last Duel that showed a historical event through three separate characters. Each person does have similar things they agree on, but each tells how the crime of rape occurred and shows how everyone can see things differently. I know that sounds like faint praise, but I do appreciate that this movie and Northman were accurate to the setting in which they were an all-white cast, and did not feel a need to force in diversity, where in recent years there has been some blackwashing where a non-white actor plays a historically white person. There were even some people giving Dunkirk flack just because the movie was not diverse enough, despite the fact that most people who fought in the Battle of Dunkirk were white men. The worst offender is Hamilton, which I know is a musical and not a movie, but a film version of a live performance is on Disney+, so close enough. We all know that the Founding Fathers looked like this, and not this. But in all seriousness, Hamilton is cringe. But then again, this is coming from the same guy whose favorite musical is about a bunch of cats singing and dancing in a junkyard. So to finish the second half of my question, when is it not okay to be historically inaccurate? In the opposite of entertaining the audience, it is worse when a movie lies about a historical event to push an agenda. In the movie Pearl Harbor, it shows the Japanese bombing a hospital which never happened. And in the movie The Patriot, the movie's villain has his British men burn down a church with people inside, but this war crime never happened during the American Revolution. These things are cheap and distasteful ways for a movie to vilify a character or characters. An example of historical revisionism was from the movie Detroit. This movie purposely lies about historical facts to push a message, as opposed to trying to tell the actual story of the riots that took place in that city in 1967. There were no Jim Crow-like restrictions on who could live where because Detroit geographically is far away from the states where those laws were enforced. In addition, the movie does not even bother to explain what caused the riots in the first place, and to cater more to the activist demographic, which was a bad financial investment. Another movie that does an even worse job at historical revisionism was The Woman King, that depicts a tribe that fought against the European slave trade, when in fact the Dahomey tribe were participants in the slave trade, which is just about as suspicious as his unusually high Rotten Tomatoes score. The worst offender that flat out lies to push an agenda is the movie Inherit the Wind. Even though it does retain a high score till this very day, the movie is riddled with historical inaccuracies about the well-publicized and highly well-documented Scopes monkey trial. John Thomas Scopes never spent a single night in jail. Henry Drummond was not an underdog attorney. In fact, he had a squad of lawyers, one of them was from the ACLU. No woman ever took the stand, and Matthew Harrison Brady did not die in the courtroom. The point of the movie was to vilify one side while making heroes out of people who were never that to begin with. This and other pieces of historical revisionism needs to be exposed more often and rejected. So, getting back to Anastasia, what do I like about the movie? I've always liked it since I was a kid, and I would dare say it's one of the best animated movies of the 1990s. The main character is someone who clearly has a chip on her shoulder, but one we can cheer on since her goal is to reconnect with her past and what family she has left. She is far more admirable, likable, and furthermore a better written animated female character than the ones in recent years. It does have a 1990s-like romance where the characters bicker, which was common in Meg Ryan movies, some beautiful animation that you can just frame on desktop screensaver, and not to mention some amazing song numbers. My favorites being Once Upon December and Journey into the Past, where they could easily go toe-to-toe with some of the iconic Disney song numbers of that time. And as I said in my previous video about Rasputin, I think it's safe to say that Anastasia is one of the several animated women that I saw growing up as a kid that explains why I have a fondness for redheads. So anyway, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.